This is the new Facelift BMW 530e plug-in hybrid, while this is also the new BMW 530i. Both are dressed in M Sport body kit, and while they may look very similar to each other, they're actually very different cars, and here's why. First, let's go through what has changed with the Facelift 5. The headlamps are slimmer, the grills are joined to each other and more angular. Like before, they even come with active fins that open and close depending on whether the car needs to cut through air more effectively or needs more cooling. Both come with 19-inch style 845 wheels with run-flat tyres, M Sport suspension and brakes, and sportier front and rear bumpers. The most dramatic change has to be these taillights with a 3D look. When it lights up at night, it's almost impossible not to get mesmerized by it. Overall, the changes may be subtle, like on the headlamps and on the bumpers, but if you ask me, it has really modernized what is already a 5-year-old design ever since the G30 5 Series first arrived in Malaysia in 2017. Looks may be subjective, but I think if you compare this with its direct competitor, it's clear which looks better. The differences between the two on the outside is a little more obvious when you look a little closer. At the front, the 530i gets an additional radar, which allows the car to have active cruise control with stop-and-go function. It can even come to a complete stop on its own in traffic and accelerate again once the vehicle ahead has moved. If you look closely, there are blue markings on the headlamps of the 530i. That's because this one comes with the highest range BMW laser light system. What's so special about them? For starters, light can spread over 500 meters, and when you're driving in complete darkness, the light comes on and off with this fade-in, fade-out effect, not only brightening up all the dark spots on the road, but also avoids glaring oncoming traffic. I get amused every time it happens. It never gets old. The 530e doesn't come with the laser light technology, although it still has the adaptive headlamp feature. The other obvious difference between the two variants is in the boot. The 530i as you're in gets 530 litres, 530, but in the 530e plug-in hybrid, because you have all the batteries at the back taking up most of the space, the boot is actually smaller at just 410 litres. And even though you can lower the boot floor to free up more space, it just doesn't feel big enough. And because of all the batteries again, the fuel tank in the 530e is actually smaller at just 48 litres against 68 litres. Before we move on to the cabin, I also want to point out that on the 530i, you get chrome window surrounds and a silver tap on the fenders, while in the 530e, it's all blacked out. Minor details, but if you ask me, I think it's enough to give these two similar models different characters. Inside, both models come with dual 12.3-inch displays. One's for your infotainment system and all that, while the other is for the meter and everything else about the car. Both also get M Sport steering wheel, wireless charging, similar trims on the dashboard and on the door trims. Both models also come with a reverse camera display, which in my opinion is one of the sharpest in the industry and the most fun to watch when in action. I mean, I don't think I'll ever get bored watching it because it's so smooth and seamless. And they also come with this reverse assistant function, which is not just useful but also a really cool party trick to have in a car. And now I'm going to show you how it works. The system basically traces the car's forward movement for 50 meters and it keeps looping. And that only happens when you're driving 36 kilometers an hour or slower. So say I'm driving into a back lane. It's really tight, it's really narrow, I'm driving slowly as you would in a back lane, making a tight turn, and then all of a sudden, I see a car ahead of me. And there's no way to get around it because it's a one-lane road. So the only way is to reverse. Press the parking icon, select the reversing assistant feature, engage reverse gear, okay, done. start driving, observe surroundings and brake manually. The only part of the car that I'm controlling now are the brakes. So as you can see, it's actually steering on its own. Reversing through that tight turn, as you can see. You can also see the countdown as to how much distance is left for the car to reverse. It's going back exactly to where my starting point was. Now, if you don't control the brakes, the fastest the car will reverse on its own is 9 kilometers an hour. End of route reached, take over vehicle control. And that's how it works. Every single time I show this feature to somebody new, the reaction is always the same. What? Whoa! Damn! I mean, I've never had to use this in a real-life situation, but if I had to, I think it'll be quite useful. Interestingly, a few months back, when we had this car for a different shoot in Datuk Sago, I remember it having Apple CarPlay and other such connectivities, but now it's gone and only available in the 530i. So I'm thinking it could be one of those trial things where at the end of it, you have to subscribe or pay to get that service. With the driver's seat adjusted to my driving position, as you can see, space is not something you'd be lacking whether in the 530e or the 530i. And the same goes to comfort as well, because this car's got 4-zone air conditioning, and that means the front 2 passengers can have their own temperatures and the rear 2 passengers can also adjust 2 separate temperatures. Whether or not it's necessary is another thing, but having that kind of feature is always a plus. Other creature comforts include an armrest with cup holders, aircon vents by the B-pillar and dual USB-C charging ports for the rear passengers, and especially for the kids back here who are constantly on their gadgets. You also get sunshades for the side windows and also for the rear windscreen. As for the seats, some might say the padding is a little hard, but personally for me, I've sat in the back seat in this car going outstation and I've never had a problem with it. On the topic of interior ambience, I would prefer this cognac leather upholstery over the black one in the 530i. I think it gives the cabin a touch of luxury but also makes it look a lot livelier. Now that we're in the full black interior of the 530i, you see what I mean? It just looks a little more dull, a little more mundane. Some could even say boring, but I suppose you can also argue that in the long run, this would be a more timeless look and perhaps more resistant to stains. The 530i with its larger price tag does come with a few additional standout features like the head-up display, for example, the sunroof as well, and the 16-speaker Harman Kardon sound system, as opposed to the 12-speaker sound system that you get in the 530e. The 530i is also different from the 530e in terms of the meter cluster. With the 530i, you get the standard display, while in the 530e, you get additional parameters for your battery capacity, your electric driving range, and a whole lot more. When it comes to the drive and ride experience, these two are highly similar but also quite different from one another. The one thing both models have in common is how comfortable they are. Plush is how I would describe the ride experience. It's like falling onto the bed of a 7-star resort, the type that just soaks you in. Whether you're speeding, cruising, steering the car, or even just applying the brakes, the car does it in such an elegant, graceful manner. And that's the exact characteristic every luxury sedan should have. Compared to its direct competitor, I feel a lot more isolated inside this cabin when the car is going through uneven roads without hearing all the vibrations from under the car. You might think that I'm oozing all this love because I'm driving a nice car, but no. This job has allowed me to drive a lot of cars to the point that there's actually an apparent difference between what is nice to drive and what isn't. This one is definitely one of the better ones. It's true, I've got nothing particularly bad to say about these two cars, only observations to share on how different they deliver their power, how they flex their muscles. Before I go on, let's talk numbers. The 530i runs on a purely petrol-powered 2-litre turbocharged engine, pushing out 252 horsepower and 350 Newton meters. The 530e, on the other hand, has the same engine but assisted with an electric motor. Together, they also produce 252 horsepower but much more torque at 420 Newton meters. With the extra boost feature, you get even more power, 292 horsepower to be exact, but only for about 10 seconds. And because of that, these two cars behave very differently. In the 530e, acceleration just feels a lot more instant and smoother when you're moving from a standstill or driving slowly around the shops. Because in those driving conditions, most of the time, you're in electric mode. Now I understand how and why GC won when we brought these two cars to Datuk Sago recently for a few challenges. It's not because of driver skill. Most times, the 530e will be running on electric, as and when there's enough charge, with a little gauge to tell you just how much you can go in electric mode. It can, however, charge itself quite quickly when you hit this battery control button here. When the batteries are fully charged, BMW says there's up to 67 kilometers of electric driving range, with a larger 12 kilowatt battery and a top speed of up to 140 kilometers an hour, purely on electric. But it really depends on how you drive. If you're driving like you're rushing to deliver a baby, then that distance is going to be a lot less. If you can drive like a mentally stable human being and the distances you're covering is just to work and back, and then you charge the car at the office, you can actually go through a few days without using any petrol, as I've tried. Personally, I think this car restricts you from the simple desire of enjoying performance, because there's so much to consider. Especially under hard acceleration, when the batteries are not fully charged, you're basically pulling a very heavy 1.8-ton car using mainly the engine. But when the batteries are fully charged, you have to be more careful with the way you drive to conserve power so that there is enough to assist the engine with acceleration so that you rely less on the engine to save fuel. Speaking of which, the 530e is 200 kilograms heavier than the 530i. And you can also argue that we can charge it on the go, but we've already discussed the effects of that. If you ask me, I think this car will only serve its true purpose if you can charge it regularly, whether at home or at the office. Otherwise, I'd recommend the 530i. Compared to the 530e, this is like the Lotus Elise version of the BMW 5 Series. Because it's so much lighter, it's also much livelier. The 530e is not a handicap, it's still very capable when you're feeling naughty, but this one feels more fun and engaging to be naughty in. Even though acceleration is noticeably less responsive compared to the 530e, because this one doesn't have electric assistance, it's still, by today's standards, very smooth, very powerful. In terms of fuel consumption, the 530i has clocked an average of 8.5 litres per 100 kilometers, while the 530e at 7.8 litres per 100 kilometers. But that's with consistent charging on the go and at the office. Compared to how the 530e accelerates, some could even say the 530i feels a bit old school, traditional, dinosaur even. But personally, from behind the wheel, no complaints still. It's still got that familiar, raw, 3-litre type of performance that you just cannot get enough of. If it was me, I'd go for this, the 530i, simply because I know I won't be able to charge it consistently and there's just less to fuss about. With this, it's more simple and straightforward. One full tank gets you just over 700 kilometers of driving range, and I think if you drive it reasonably enough, you can still go far with it. And the fuel consumption isn't all that different. The 530e, on the other hand, is still a very good car overall, just that it comes without the high-end features. But if you ask me, it's only practical if you can charge it consistently. End of story. For more information on the BMW 530i and 530e M Sport PHEV, do log on to AutoBuzz.my. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, share it, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon for the latest notifications on our newest videos.